checked and analysed by tech giants.
You have to think about their business model is collect as much information as possible so that they can then sell that information who wants to find exactly you.
Across the world, citizens are striving to protect their privacy.
There are many, many ways that you can remain confidential even in this hyper-connected world with a lot of state surveillance.
So, is it only possible to go under the radar to cover your online tracks? We've got the guide on Reporters Plus. Join us on France 24 and France24.com.
France 24, your window on the world.
Liberté, égalité, actualité.
Russia ramps up its offensive to take control of eastern Ukraine, intensifying assaults along a front hundreds of kilometers long in what officials on both sides describe as a new phase of the war. Here in France, incumbent Emmanuel Macron and his far-right rival Marine Le Pen gear up for the last week of campaigning ahead of the second round of the presidential election this Sunday. Both candidates particularly focused on a high-stakes televised debate tomorrow. And France 24 takes a closer look at the political impasse that's brought Iraq's government to a standstill and the ripple effects it's having on everyday citizens across the country. You're watching France 24. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Claire Rush. Russia carried out dozens of airstrikes in eastern Ukraine on Monday night as it launches a larger offensive to take control of the Donbass region. Well, according to Kyiv, Russian forces have been trying this Tuesday to push through Ukrainian defenses along the eastern front line, which stretches for some 480 kilometers. And in the first reported success of Russia's new assault, Ukraine said the Russians had seized Kreminna, a frontline town in Luhansk province. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says Moscow is now expected to concentrate on this assault, which he has called the Battle for Donbass. Our correspondent Gulliver Cragg has the latest from the ground.
The Russians have succeeded in taking so far in the Donbass region since the invasion on the 24th of February only small amounts of territory really, apart from the northeastern part of Luhansk Oblast, Luhansk region, which is relatively sparsely populated. The fighting now has been concentrated mainly around four towns, Popasna, which is in the center south, if you like, of Luhansk region, and Rubizhne and Kreminna, which are just to the northwest of Severodonetsk, which is the largest Ukrainian-controlled city in the Luhansk region. That's clearly a key target to try to take Severodonetsk. Reports yesterday evening were that the Russians had managed to take control of Kreminna, or at least the main part of it, but they hadn't managed to take Rubizhne. And there seems to be an attempt to have a sort of pincer movement coming up from the fourth area where there is intense fighting, which is Marinka and other areas just outside of the Russian-backed separatist stronghold of Donetsk, that they seem to be trying to push north from there and then sort of south from the Severodonetsk-Rubizhne area and try to encircle Ukrainian forces who are in control of Slavyansk and Kramatorsk, which are two of the largest cities in Donetsk region. The Russian forces are still quite far away from those two cities, but all of these places have been subjected to intense artillery bombardment now for weeks, actually. naturally, but it intensified even more yesterday evening, due, according to various reports. US experts say that there are 76 Russian battalion tactical groups fighting basically for this offensive in the Donbass, 11 of which were deployed only in recent days, and that there are 22 more just to the north of the border. Now, some of these groups are battalion tactical groups that were fighting in the north of Ukraine, in Kiev region and in Chernihiv region, suffered very severe losses there, and there's a big question as to how much they're going to be able to be re-equipped, redeployed, get their morale back up and be made combat ready again. Lots of military experts are saying that they don't think that they're going to be able to muster that much of a fighting force out of these units that suffered those defeats in Kiev and Chernihiv regions. But that's really the question now as to how battle ready these Russian units are going to be. And then the other place I didn't mention yet, of course, is Mariupol, which part of which anyway, mainly I think just the Azov steelworks where Ukrainian forces are holed up, is still under Ukrainian hands. So we can't say that Mariupol has yet fallen to the Russian forces, and a lot of their military resources are still being tied up in this battle for the southern port city of Mariupol. That's clearly a Ukrainian tactic to diminish the firepower, if you like, of the Russian offensive on Donbass. Meanwhile, the Russians are trying to diminish the Ukrainians' firepower with these targeted attacks on various, what they deem to be military targets elsewhere in the country, which I think is what this attack on the western city of Lviv yesterday was all about.
Oliver Craig reporting there. And in other news that's just coming in, Russia's foreign ministry says it plans to expel 36 European diplomats. We will keep you updated on that as we receive more information. Well, here in France, the second round of the presidential election is just days away. Incumbent Emmanuel Macron and far-right candidate Marine Le Pen are gearing up for the final week of campaigning ahead of Sunday's vote. The two will face off in a televised debate tomorrow, and the stakes are high, particularly for Le Pen. Many analysts described her debate performance as poor in the 2017 election. Days after that bruising TV duel against Macron, she lost in the second round. Well, here to break all this down for us is France 24 reporter Clovis Casali. Clovis, glad to have you here in the studio. Tell us more about why this debate is so important.
Well, first, it's the first time that Emmanuel Macron and Marine Le Pen will be able to exchange views directly, face-to-face. First time this campaign. Very important for voters here in France to decide who they're going to choose, because there is still a lot of undecided people here. When you look at the person who came third, Jean-Luc Mélenchon, far-left candidate, when you look at the people who backed him in the first round, well, 1/3 are going to go for Macron, 1/3 for Marine Le Pen, and 1/3 undecided. That's more or less what the latest estimates show. So this debate is the chance for these candidates to really try to win over voters, a last chance to convince the undecided, woo those who might not be sure until the very last minute. This debate was followed back 5 years ago by 16.5 million viewers. And that was the worst record in the history of the Fifth Republic. So we can expect even more people watching this debate. It's going to be important, and Marine Le Pen knows it. That's why she's taken 2 days off, if you will, to really prepare at home with her closest advisors, with people who know her manifesto well, but also people who know TV well. There's a former TV presenter from LCI, for instance, who's now one of her closest advisors, Philippe Ballard, who's really coaching her on how to deliver, how to come across. 5 years ago, when she was already facing Emmanuel Macron, her performance was disastrous. She admitted it, her entourage admitted it, and during the campaign, her supporters were telling us, yes, she has improved. She is much better prepared than 5 years ago. We're so excited about this debate. We're finally going to be able to see Emmanuel Macron and Marine Le Pen face to face. And I can tell you, she's ready to attack.
Yeah, and you've been following Le Pen on the campaign trail. Do you have a sense of what strategy she could adopt in this debate, or what the main focus, what the main issues that she focus on will be?
Well, firstly, she's saying that in that debate 5 years ago, Emmanuel Macron wasn't president. This time, he's got 5 years of presidency, and she's going to be attacking him on what he failed to do or mishandled. So, of course, the yellow vest, possibly the COVID-19 pandemic, and also the war in Ukraine. Surely she's going to be criticizing him for the way he handled all of those very difficult spells or moments, it has to be said. Marine Le Pen, during the campaign, and that was quite surprising, really focused on purchasing power, on the cost of living, saying, look, it's so difficult for so many French people in the country. We need to bring down prices, bring down taxes, and that's what she's been campaigning on. She was known until now for her stance on immigration. We're talking about a far-right candidate. And she's been talking a bit less about immigration and Islam. But when journalists really ask her, what's your view on immigration? Why aren't you talking about it? She says, it's simply because the French know us so well. They know our stance on immigration. Yes, we want to crack down on immigration, cut down. She also wants to ban the Islamic veil, so in the street, because she sees that as a symbol of Islam, and she sees Islam as a totalitarian ideology. That's what she calls it. So tomorrow during the debate, she will be talking about immigration, maybe less than purchasing power, and she'll also be talking about Europe. She no longer wants to leave Europe or give up the euro currency, but she wants an alliance instead of nations, which basically means leaving the union, not committing as much, not coming up with common policies. And she says, don't worry, I've got allies in Europe, I've got Poland, I've got Hungary, Viktor Orban, all Eurosceptics. So it's going to be difficult to actually negotiate in Europe. And all of these issues will be debated against Emmanuel Macron. Marine Le Pen has a lot to win, but also a lot to lose. Last time, 5 years ago, just to finish, 5 years ago, after the debate, she lost 3 points in the polls. And now it's so close that she's got to do extremely well in that debate.
All right, Clovis Casali, France 24 reporter, thank you for that. And we will be covering that debate tomorrow, so tune into France 24 for that. Moving on, a continued political deadlock in Iraq. 6 months after parliamentary elections, the country has still not chosen a president or prime minister. For this, 2/3 of parliament would have to approve a candidate, but a power-sharing dispute between the two largest political blocs has led to a boycott of parliamentary sessions, and quorum has not been reached. The political impasse is being felt not just in parliament, but amongst ordinary citizens as well. Our correspondent Lucille Wasserman has the story.
On the outskirts of Baghdad, Mohanad al-Asadi supervises the construction of new roads. Usually the manager has 10 projects going at once, but Iraq's political deadlock has brought most of his work to a standstill.
Most of the funds for infrastructure projects for roads, sewage, electricity, etc. are all funded by the federal budgets. Since the government hasn't been formed, the budget hasn't been submitted, let alone approved.
Thousands of projects are stalled across the country, and Mohanad can't hide his frustration with the political impasse.
We went to vote, now it's time for politicians to step up and work together, form a government and move this country forward.
Long delays are typical when forming a government in Iraq, on average lasting 5.5 months. This is a time when political blocs are supposed to negotiate how to share power, but for the first time in nearly 20 years, official discussions are simply not happening because the biggest winner of the elections, Muqtada al-Sadr, refuses to include his rivals, an alliance of pro-Iran parties, in the government.
The system of governance has been consensus-based since 2003, so all components of Iraqi society must agree. Now they want to break this tradition. Well then, it's within our rights to form alliances with other parties and boycott parliamentary sessions.
Neither political bloc has the majority needed to take control of the government. As a result, a stalemate has taken hold in the country, and ordinary citizens are suffering the fallout, especially in low-income neighborhoods where residents rely on government projects to bring about an adequate standard of living.
During elections, we were promised that projects would start as soon as the government was formed. For example, they told us that they were going to get rid of all the landfill so that we could live a normal life. If only you knew how the smell and smoke makes us sick.
There's no guarantee that these promises will be kept should a government be formed. But as long as the status quo remains, a better life for Iraqis is impossible.
You're watching France 24. Stay tuned for more world news.
This next song is about all your private pictures that you put on the web of yourselves, of your loved ones, of everything you are and everything you want to be.
Every day we leave digital footprints behind us. When we're browsing, messaging, or even when we're moving. Even the most innocuous piece of data exposes us to many risks.
You have to think about their business model is collect as much information as possible so that they can then sell that information who wants to find exactly you.
The way you'll try to protect yourself won't be the same if the threat comes from a jealous husband or wife, or if it comes from your boss, or, in my case, if I work with WikiLeaks on documents from the NSA and CIA.
This is a great warning to the rest of the world. Our civil liberties are eroding in front of our eyes.
Whether we're young students, ordinary citizens, journalists, or dissidents, we all face different types of threats online. And there are adapted ways for each of us to respond.
When I hear people say privacy is dead, I think that's nonsense. I don't believe it at all. I think that there are many, many ways that you can remain confidential even in this hyper-connected world with a lot of state surveillance.
Max Thomas is an actor and musician based in Berlin. He's a frequent user of social media and other services provided by big tech, and recently woke up to the issue of data tracking. He knows the risks are limited for him in Germany today, but he's worried about the growing threat posed by tech giants on civil liberties. To learn how to better protect his privacy, he signed up for the Chaos Communication Camp. Every 4 years, this event brings together a community of hackers and coders from all over Europe. Together, they're working to build a more open internet.
Max.
Hey, good to see you.
Yes.
I have some questions. One big thing that I'm really trying to conquer is like, how could I get rid of Google?
The way we try to approach Google is also to compartmentalize. Accept that if you have to use one of these tools because you cannot avoid it, at least you can show to them only a small portion of your life and not the entire of your life.
Typically, I would recommend diversifying the tools you use. So rather than relying, for example, on Google for email, for maps, for search, for translation, you can find different privacy-conscious tools for each of these needs. I would highly recommend that you start with the apps where you don't rely on anyone, like your browser. If you've been using Google Chrome, you could use Firefox, you could use Chromium, you could use Tor browser. There are so many different ones out there. And after you find a new browser and you try out a new browser, why don't you try a new search engine? You could change, for example, to DuckDuckGo. Some people try some other ones. They try Cirx, they try Quant. There are so many privacy-conscious search engines.
We had this talk in the afternoon about Facebook because we try to get away from it, but still no one does.
In one side, we don't know what is a better Facebook. So we, as society, have hard time in figuring out which kind of rights and empowerment we are losing because of the Facebook imprinting.
Yes.
My theory is that we should be in control of our algorithm, we should be in control of our data, and know exactly where we are sharing and how they are treated. And that cannot be sustainable by the current Facebook business model.
Yeah.
Also in Berlin, we had some resistance against Google coming to Kreuzberg, you heard about?
Yes.
And that's raised a lot of attention on how Google was infiltrating in our life.
Yes, and that was amazing. Even for Google, I think they never thought that this could happen.
In 2018, under pressure from local protests, Google had to give up plans of building a tech campus in the Kreuzberg neighborhood of Berlin.
I think Berlin is quite free as a city, and Berliners made it clear, with large protests and by calling on their elected officials, that no one in Kreuzberg wanted a Google campus.
Like most artists, Max needs social media to promote his shows. But it makes him increasingly uneasy. This morning, he's meeting with members of Reclaim Club Culture, a collective of nightlife professionals looking to organize independently.
There have been so many scandals about how personal data is used and about user surveillance. Our idea is to start a campaign where we would invite all the people who work for clubs and the Berlin culture scene to choose an alternative platform on which they can post their events. We have done our research. There is a project in development called Mobilisant, and it could be an alternative to Facebook events.
I'm in touch with many artists, and I'm certain that a city like Berlin, with its unique cultural offering, would be a great launchpad for this initiative and could then be exported to other cities.
Privacy protection is now everyone's concern, but teenagers are on the front lines. They're some of the most avid users of social networks like TikTok, Instagram, or Snapchat. The teachers at Casablanca's Louis Massignon French School want to show their students the dark side of their favorite apps.
Bonjour. Hi.
So today, we're going to look at social networks. First off, have any of you ever read the terms and conditions of a social network?
Honestly, I've never read those terms and conditions because they use really complicated words. It's really long. I've never taken the time to read them, and I also tell myself that since everyone else accepts them, so will I.
So here it's an English lawyer who's rewritten the terms and conditions in a language that's easy to understand for young people, even as young as 9.
So, although you remain responsible for the information you post on Instagram, we can keep, use and share your personal information with companies connected to Instagram. We are not responsible for what these other companies do with your information.
On top of the data that you posted, you're also going to share what people call metadata. The time at which you connected, how many times you liked this or that content. All this data, they then sell it to companies that themselves sell it to other companies afterwards.
Let's move on to the second quote. Go ahead, can you read it, please?
Officially, you are the owner of the pictures and videos you post, but we are authorized to use them. We can also let other people use them all over the world. Others can pay us to use them, but we won't. We won't have to pay you in exchange.
Basile?
It's really shocking. It's if we supplied the wood and we built the fire, but we don't get the heat.
Exactly.
That's right. Actually, they give you the chimney. You can use Instagram for free, but that data belongs to them and they'll use it. That's always how it works. The students' privacy is very important to us, because if we're not the ones who protect our students' privacy, then who will? There are three types of risks when it comes to how their data is used. Mostly, there's how that data is exploited by the tech giants or the companies that work for them. Then there's also the risk of seeing their data used by hackers who gain access to their accounts. And then there's of course the risk of this data being used maliciously by other students. That's cyberbullying.
Many children have fallen prey to cyberbullying on social media. To stop that, teachers are showing their students how to better protect their accounts.
In our last class, you remember, we played a game where you had to find the security flaws on your friend's account. Can I hear some of your feedback on this?
I did the experiment with Rich's Instagram account. To start with, her account is private, but it's with her first name. And in her bio, there's her age and her profile pic. You can see her face. You can't see any posts, but on some stories you can see where she's travelling, when she's travelling, etc.
Okay, so what's your assessment of her account?
It's okay, there's...
Okay, could be better? Okay.
But I'm not the best example to follow either.
If you have the time to sit down and look through each of the privacy setting options, there are some really great gems in here. So you can decide who sees your posts. For example, by default, it might be set to public, and you may want to change that and reduce it just to the people that you've accepted to your page. So you can control what users are seeing your information. Here it says, do you want search engines outside of to link to your profile? Yes or no? And by default, it's set as yes. So this is a really great place to secure the options that are important to you.
Hello, Mr. Measu. My name is Wei Kei. I am a researcher from Hong Kong. I have been following your work about digital security. I was hoping to meet you to talk about the situation we're facing with China. I trust that you will be discreet. I have been as careful as I could, but it's still scary.
Like thousands of Hong Kongers, Wei Kei thought there was no risk going online. But with the umbrella movement to protest against Chinese encroachment on Hong Kong's autonomy, everything changed. Now, Chinese authorities can monitor the communications of any citizen.
So, tell me more. How is the situation in Hong Kong?
It's getting worse and worse. You know, the police are getting more and more violent. The conversation has broken down completely, and we are very worried.
And do you have some kind of a plan?
I think the first step for me would be to learn how to secure myself, and then I will be able to reach out to other people. I'm actually thinking about a campaign for the general public, and I wonder if you would have any contacts of people that I can speak to. Because of my experience living in China, I'm quite familiar how the Chinese government actually infiltrates in the general public and how they, you know, pinpoint certain individuals. I worry about that one day it will also happen to Hong Kong. For people to continue with their work, to fight for our rule of law and for our freedom of speech, they must learn how to protect themselves.
Hello?
Hello, hello, this is Wei Kei.
So what sort of occupation are you involved with?
I work as a researcher, but then after the uprising, I became involved in digital security training. So I'm doing a lot of campaigning and contacting people who are actually high risk.
And so now you're back to learn a little bit more about threat models?
Yeah, threat modeling is something quite new to me.
Okay, and it will help determine your risk. There are 5 questions that you can ask yourself. The first question, what is it that you want to keep private? The second question is related.
Threat modeling. This is getting through the process of thinking, who is that I need to protect from? What is that I need to safe keep? And what is the kind of the worst case scenario? And you start realizing, well, okay, my adversary is this. What I think this adversary is capable of? Is it capable of wiretapping my internet communications or not? Is it capable of, getting data out of providers that I use or not? Is it capable of hacking or not?
The adversaries that I'm facing are actually state actors, so they do have the financial means and technical power. I think my risk would be exposing my contacts. That's my deepest worry. The worst scenario for me would be I get caught. I would be subject to interrogation, and in the worst scenario, torture. These things are all too common in mainland China.
Online surveillance has become a major issue for journalists. By contacting them, their sources run the risk of leaving online footprints that could later help identify and prosecute them. To solve this problem, Julian Assange co-founded WikiLeaks in 2006. The secure platform allows whistleblowers to share sensitive documents while protecting their identities. WikiLeaks exposed to the public the abuses committed by the US Army in Iraq and Afghanistan.
This might be the one hit. It's got windows in the side. That is the prison van, but I don't know if he's coming here. It could be him.
Julian Assange has been in the crosshairs of the American government since 2011. He's under threat of extradition towards the US, where he could face up to 175 years in prison.
The first contact problem, this is one of the big issues that we face in journalism. If we just think about a scenario which is that you're a whistleblower, you've got some important information that you want to disclose to me, you use your, let's say, your Gmail address, which has your name and your Gmail that you've used for years, or the normal open line phone call, that's created a permanent record between you and me.
I suggest different levels of security. So someone who doesn't risk anything contacting me, he can write to me on Twitter, Facebook, by email. Someone who potentially could be harmed, if it was discovered that he contacted me, then he can contact me on Signal. Someone who has a very high threat level, typically someone who worked or currently works for intelligence services and wants to hand over a document, can use Secure Drop. It's a program specifically set up to preserve anonymity when getting in touch with an investigative reporter.
In 2010, I was the Spiegel's reporter in London, and I was with reporters from the New York Times and The Guardian in some sort of bunker at the Guardian headquarters. Together, we wrote the first reports on the war in Afghanistan. And when you read them today, it's surprising to see how much people would say in simple emails. WikiLeaks, however, annoyingly and repeatedly asked us to encrypt everything and to always be cautious. And we always laughed amongst us about how paranoid they were. We worked together. It was a true journalistic collaboration. Today, I ask myself the question, what have I done that's different than Julian Assange at the time? I'd even go further. When you read the US's extradition request, who's next on the list? I mean, concretely, what have we done that's different?
If someone's in possession of documents that could be compromising, that are of public interest and they don't know what to do, today the first thing they should do is find the right person to get in touch with. Finding the journalist that will be able to make this document public while minimizing the risk.
What I would usually suggest is that the person, if they can buy a cheap new laptop, like a little notebook or something like that, go to a cafe, a public Wi-Fi network, download the Tor browser, connect to the Secure Drop page. Then you can make contact with us through that by sending a message, and from there we could probably take next steps to try and figure out, how we could get further information from you without compromising your security and safety.
Meanwhile, Max is testing Mobilisons, the Facebook events alternative that's about to launch. Today, with other artists, he's meeting with the developers of Mobilisons to talk about how the platform works.
So, why are we still on Facebook as artists, everyone?
We had 15 years of getting used to host everything, delegate everything, the data storage, the server maintenance to Facebook. But if you want a Mobilism instance, then you have to host it somewhere and you have to pay for the server hosting. But this is what freedom really costs. These are the hidden costs that Facebook and so on would hide from us and compensate with stealing our privacy.
So, if I got it right, it means that we could do our own local server, what you call an instance, and download the software to it and give it a name, like Mobilize Berlin, and then we could invite Berlin artists and clubs to come to our platform, and then they could federate that means communicate with the other servers in Germany and worldwide. Is it right?
Yeah, exactly. That's the federation model. It's a philosophical shift.
The most famous federated platform is the social network called Mastodon. Since its creation in 2016, millions of users have moved from Twitter to this free and open source alternative.
Federation means that there is not a single authority that is in control of the whole network. It means that there's multiple authorities. If you're familiar with email, email is another federated network. You have servers like Hotmail, Outlook, Yahoo, Gmail. You sign up somewhere, you get an email address that starts with your username and ends with the server you're on. And that system allows you to email anyone on any email server just by using that address. So federation is a method by which these authorities are spread out, as opposed to, for example, Twitter or Facebook, where they have, well, I'm going to say one server and millions of users. On Mastodon, because it's decentralized, you have a large number of small servers. Each is owned and operated by different individual or organization, and you get the ability to follow or interact with anyone who's on any other server as well.
To prepare for the launch of Mobilisons, Max invited his artist friends to a crypto party, an informal event where newbies can learn about various alternatives to the tech giants and also about the basics of online security.
So we're going to talk about browsing here. Are you familiar with what a VPN is? Yeah? A VPN, a virtual private network? No? Many people use VPNs for privacy reasons by connecting to a VPN and then going into the internet from the VPN. And one of the benefits of that is that your IP address then looks like it's coming from the VPN, not from your home network. And that protects, in some sense, your identity. Have you heard of Tor before? Yeah? And do you know how it differs from a VPN?
Not really, no.
No? Okay. So Tor is an acronym. It stands for the onion router. In some sense, it's similar to a VPN in that your connection to the actual internet looks like it's coming from somewhere else. But with Tor, it doesn't connect to one node, called a node. Rather, it connects to 3 nodes, and then it goes into the internet. And with these layers, that's why it's the onion router, you can have potentially some anonymous connection to the internet. Of course, it's not anonymous if you then log into your Facebook account.
One table over, people are busy ungoogling their Android phones. There are alternatives for most of their apps. For instance, Google Maps can be replaced by OpenStreetMap or Quant Maps in order not to share your location with Google.
The step that I don't understand, since I have an Android and since I have a Google account and my old phone that's connected to Google, they know my information anyway.
Not sharing any data with Google involves a complicated procedure, completely replacing the Android operating system by another one like Lineage that is free and open source.
In general, Crypto Party recommends free and open source. Have you ever heard this term before?
Once again.
Free and open source?
Free open source.
Free and open source. Basically, it belongs to all of us. So it's the source code is available for other people to take, to use, to modify, to share with other people. It's maximally transparent.
In French, I describe free software using
the three words, liberté, égalité, fraternité, because that's exactly what free software is about. Liberté means each user is free in using the program. Égalité because every user has the same rights. And fraternité because we encourage users to cooperate with other users. One fairly common kind of malicious functionality is to spy on the user. You must suppose that any non-free program you run is sending data about you and your activities to some company and perhaps to a government.
These past few years, the education sector has been undergoing a digital transition. In Casablanca, at the Louis Massignon French School, that journey started in 2017. The teaching staff had to make software choices, looking at the programs offered by Big Tech. They had questions about student data collection.
We tried 5 or 6 options in the school. There were several options. Some weren't free, some were open source, and so we really saw the positives and negatives of each option.
The tech giants inevitably give options that are immediate, practical, easy to use, integrated, ergonomic, pleasant and fun. Nevertheless, what guides us as teachers is educational freedom. And what Big Tech was offering was a ready-to-use option, and those ready-to-use options are generally restrictive.
In terms of respect for privacy and data collection, we were more in line with open source software. That's why we've always privileged open source options over proprietary ones.
OneNote, which is Microsoft software, was also suggested to us, but actually it wasn't really a good fit for the school setting. As for Google Classroom, we quickly realized that we had to use Google's email and cloud services in order to teach class. Students had to have a Google email address, and that wasn't really an option for middle schoolers and kids in primary school, and so the teachers rejected it.
The staff ended up choosing a system called Moodle, as well as Big Blue Button, which is an alternative to Zoom. A choice that didn't win everyone over at first. Open source software has a reputation for being difficult to use.
Moodle isn't the most inviting software at first. It's not very sexy, not very intuitive. It's a bit rough at first use. But then actually it gives room for teachers to be super creative. We can do anything we want to. We can customize it as much as we want.
In London, Julian Assange's extradition trial begins. 5 weeks of hearings in front of Judge Vanessa Bereitzer, hidden away from the cameras in the high-security Belmarsh prison. The prosecution of a journalist for publishing confidential documents is a first in the West. A legal precedent that is concerning for the industry.
How does it work with WikiLeaks? First off, we make a confidentiality commitment, saying we'll respect the embargo, respect the security protocols, we'll communicate on secure email services, and then we have access in a secure way to the document. Ideally, we use tails. Tails is a movable operating system that can be saved on a USB key or an SD card. You restart your computer on Tails, and then all the communications go through Tor. It's like a computer that isn't linked to my identity, and it guarantees an extra level of anonymity.
When the threat model is as extreme as it can be, we usually try and work in what we would call an air-gapped environment, which is to have computers that have never and will never connect to the internet. And we will only open certain encrypted communications on those air-gapped machines in New York. In the Intercepts office, they built a secure, compartmented facility where it's almost like Alcatraz, you know, it's like there's metal through the walls in it, so it blocks all signals coming in.
With a new national security law in 2020, Hong Kong's opposition is now directly targeted by Beijing. To counter the threat, Wei Kei now runs workshops teaching online security to activists.
Well, thank you for coming here, and today we're going to talk a little bit about security. But before I get into it, I want to talk about the new security law. Who has heard about the security law in Hong Kong?
In practice, as soon as the government does not like you for any reason, they can send you into China, be tried under the Chinese courts, and basically that's the end of you.
Mm-hmm. So, you know, we also need to escalate our security tools. So it's actually really important to encrypt your communications and encrypt your mails.
Sure, it's about your comrades too. If you're busted, your friends are busted. And from what I heard from, let's say, other activists in my circle, they don't even know what encryption is. It's scary.
So if I'm communicating to the internet from this computer, I could send that unencrypted, and then anyone on the way, my Wi-Fi, my local router, the ISP, whatever it is on the internet that went through all those things, could potentially read it. But if I have it encrypted with PGP, then it can't be read easily.
So we use two keys, two numbers. One that is simply messing up my message to you, right? Like crumbling up, for the sake of understanding. So, if I pass it on, all people here in between can only pass it on. They can. Yeah. And when you receive that, you have your secret key, the other number, to decrypt it. It's like an opener, a key that opens, and this is where we have to learn how to do this.
In civil society, generally there's a lack of resources, there's a lack of expertise, opposite to a very high capacity of the adversary to breach into electronic devices and intercept communications. And then you need to start thinking away from the strict digital security aspect and start thinking more about the operational security. When you think about operational security, you think more about changing your own behavior in order to mitigate the damage. These considerations often help much more than, say, buying hardware which are regarded as more secure.
In its early days, the internet promised to be a new space for personal freedom. Nowadays, it's mostly controlled by large companies and states. To protect our privacy, we have to learn how to do it ourselves.
The problem is that no major political force has managed to articulate a vision for what this digital world might look like were it not run by these rather unimaginative firms who can only think of selling advertising. The madness is at the level of how we've organized the entire system, where we cannot conceive of infrastructures that might have a different political economy, right? That data might be owned by citizens together and not by the firms that offer us infrastructures, right? And it's those kind of questions that I think are missing from the debate.
All eyes are now set on Brussels. The European Union is the institution that has shown the most willingness to regulate the free-for-all of data collection.
If we join forces at the European level with the member states, we can really establish a new global standard. The General Data Protection Regulation, which regulates user data tracking, thanks in part to cookies, was already a historic turning point globally. The last resort would be to dismantle the tech giants. But before we get there, of course, there are other solutions. Developing competition, encouraging companies to make data protection a central part of their business models.
Other services are possible, and some of them can be funded and offered and built differently with different respect for privacy, with a different political economy of data. That is happening in local kind of enclaves. The problem is that there has to be a logic that informs that, and you really need resources, you need money, you need billions going into this, and for billions to flow into this, you'll need to have a very different set of policy priorities at the national and European levels.
It's the big day for Max and his partners. After 2 years of preparation, they're launching their independent platform, Mobilize.Berlin. Now connected to thousands of other platforms, it's the latest addition to the free internet.
We are here today to celebrate Mobilisant and launch the website. I invite you all to check it out at the address you see up here. It's online now, and there are really cool features. It's connected to the Fediverse, which is the future of open source, free and decentralized social media. There you go, you can sign up.
Think about where our freedom comes from. The only reason we have any freedom is because of people in the past who have been willing to make some practical sacrifices for their freedom. We don't need thousands or millions of people to be heroes and take grave risks. We just need thousands, maybe millions of people to suffer a little inconvenience. But it all depends on saying no. If you occasionally say, no, I won't do that because it would mean giving up some of my freedom, you'll be advancing the campaign to win back our freedom in the digital domain.
Thumbnails, GIFs and LOLs, life, work, balance, hat, space, voll mit Trolls. Algorithmus auf der Flucht, Datenstream, Netzwerk, Cybersucht. Mein Life willst du hacken, ich werd dein Life cracken, deine Restdaten snacken und mich in dir verstecken. Mein Life willst du hacken, ich werd dein Life cracken, deine Restdaten snacken und mich in dir verstecken. Data.
Marc Mersou with that report. See it again, of course, on our website, france24.com. This is Reporters Plus, our wide-angle look at the news. Thank you for watching. Stay with us here on France 24. Most of all, stay safe.
La médina de Tripoli veut dire beaucoup pour les habitants
Bienvenidos a las noticias de France 24.
Thanks very much for joining us. أهلا بكم في ثقافة في عدد اليوم.
Ravi de vous retrouver pour Afrique Hebdo. Au programme cette semaine.
نسمع بين حين والآخر.
This storm has hit New York City a lot.
To be a president. 3, 2, 1.
Madagascar fait face à une seconde vague meurtrière.
Almost 99 million of you watch us every week. So thank you.
شكرا.
Gracias. Your confidence means a lot to us.
Muchas gracias.
شكرا على هذه الثقة.
Thank you.
Merci du fond de mon cœur.
Liberté, égalité, actualité.
War has once more reared its head in Europe, recalling the darkest hours of our history.
Kiev is still about 30 kilometers away.
France 24 is providing constant coverage of events in Ukraine. Our teams on the ground and in the studio will keep you informed of all the latest developments. Stay informed, stay aware.
Liberté, égalité, actualité.
Russia ramps up its offensive to take control of eastern Ukraine, intensifying assaults along a front hundreds of kilometers long in what officials on both sides describe as a new phase of the war. Our correspondent reports live from Kyiv. Here in France, incumbent Emmanuel Macron and his far-right rival Marine Le Pen gear up for the last week of campaigning ahead of the second round of the presidential election this Sunday. Both candidates particularly focused on a high-stakes televised debate tomorrow. And explosions target schools in a Shiite-majority neighborhood in Kabul, killing at least 6 and injuring several students. Police say they fear the death toll may continue to rise. So far, no group has claimed responsibility. You're watching France 24. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Claire Rush. Russia carried out dozens of airstrikes in eastern Ukraine on Monday night as it launches a larger offensive to take control of the Donbass region. Well, according to Kyiv, Russian forces have been trying this Tuesday to push through Ukrainian defenses along the eastern front line, which stretches for some 480 kilometers. And in the first reported success of Russia's new assault, Ukraine said the Russians had seized Kreminna, a frontline town in Luhansk province. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says Moscow is now expected to concentrate on this assault, which he has called the battle for Donbass. Well, our correspondent Gulliver Gragg is standing by for us in Kyiv. We can cross to him now. Gulliver, you just got back to the Ukrainian capital. What did you see on the way?
Well, we were allowed to drive along the main highway that goes west from Kiev, which was closed for weeks because it was the scene of intense fighting. It's now reopened because the Russian forces have, of course, left this region, and you can see so much of the traces of what went on there. Destroyed warehouses, destroyed petrol stations, and still quite a lot of destroyed Russian armor tanks and other military vehicles. These are the Russian units which suffered really severe losses in Kiev region and other parts of northern Ukraine, and which are now expected to regroup and be redeployed to the Donbass, where this Russian offensive is ongoing. According to the Ukrainian army and also to the President Volodymyr Zelensky, it has entered now its intense phase, the big push to take the whole of Donetsk and Luhansk regions, if you like. So far, they haven't really made any major gains apart from this one town of Kremina, but intense fighting is reported inside the strategic towns of Popasna, for example, and then bombardment and artillery fire on the cities of Rubizhne, Severodonetsk and Lysychansk. These are key cities in Luhansk region that the Russians are very, very close to. But then there are the Ukrainian-held cities in Donetsk region that they very much want to take control of as well, particularly Kramatorsk and Slavyansk. They're still some way off those cities, but they seem to be trying to effect a pincer movement around them coming in from the south and the north. And it really remains to be seen, and it maybe will be seen in the next few days, just how much the losses they suffered in Kiev region and Chernihiv region in northern Ukraine are going to impact the Russians' ability to carry out this offensive in eastern Ukraine.
All right, Gulliver Craig reporting for us there. Thanks for that update, Gulliver. Well, meanwhile, in Mariupol, Russia is calling on Ukrainian forces defending the besieged city to surrender. Moscow says it has opened a humanitarian corridor to leave the city for Ukrainian troops who agree to lay down their arms. Ukrainian forces in Mariupol ignored a previous such ultimatum on Sunday. The Azovstal steel plant there is believed to be the last base of Ukrainian fighters in Mariupol. Local authorities say scores of civilians are in underground shelters beneath the plant. Mariupol has been devastated by weeks of siege, a key target for Russia. It offers a land bridge between Moscow-controlled parts of eastern Ukraine and the Kremlin-annexed peninsula of Crimea. Well, as that battle for the control of eastern Ukraine gets underway, religion is also playing its role. At the front line and in the rear, military chaplains are at the side of soldiers to help maintain their morale. This report from our team in Kyiv.
At a military base in Kiev, Father Andriy, a chaplain in the Ukrainian army, conducts a service for soldiers. The church is packed. Many of those here are about to leave for the east to the Donbass, where Russian troops are massing for a new offensive.
Храм є одним із тих місць, де ти можеш прийти, заспокоїтися, бути спокійним душею, де тебе завжди підтримують. У нас є дуже добрий чоловік, отець Андрій. Він любій людині допоможе, підтримає. Для того, щоб підтримати, я стараюся частіше усміхатися, щоб передавати їм цей позитив, цю радість. Господь сам покладає інколи на серце, що потрібно сказати для того, щоб якось підтримати людину.
On this Orthodox Palm Sunday, he's there to share a smile with the soldiers and bless them before they part to join the battle in the east. The church is supporting the war effort in other ways too, collecting food, clothes and medicines for the troops. Olga is a doctor with the Ukrainian Air Force.
А наших бійців ми приїжджаємо сюди, щоб отримати медикаменти для їхнього відновлення, їхнього здоров'я, для відновлення їхнього стану і для їх реабілітації.
Що віра без діл мертва. У нас в храмі віра, внизу у нас тут діла. І діла необхідні, потрібні, тому що тут є.
Father Andriy is as much psychologist as priest, and never more so than when he departs for the front to be with the soldiers in their greatest hour of need.
Хто підходив, каже: "А де ваша зброя?" А я кажу: ось вона моя зброя.
It's one of the ironies of this war that Vladimir Putin has consolidated the Ukrainian people as never before. Russian speakers and Ukrainian speakers, Orthodox believers, Protestants, Catholics and Muslims, all united in their determination to control their own destiny. But first, they have a battle to win in the Donbass.
Moving on, here in France, the second round of the presidential election is just days away. Incumbent Emmanuel Macron and far-right candidate Marine Le Pen are gearing up for the final week of campaigning ahead of Sunday's vote. And the two will face off in a televised debate tomorrow. The stakes are high, particularly for Le Pen. Many analysts described her debate performance as poor in the last election in 2017. Days after that bruising TV duel with Macron, she lost in that second round. Let's take a look back at the role of presidential debates in France and this report from our colleagues at France 2.
It's an integral part of the second round of the French presidential elections. Beginning in 1974, the head-to-head debates have seen Giscard, Sarkozy and Hollande face off with their opponents. Some things shouldn't be repeated.
Le geste qui peut amener une forme de dédain à l'endroit de son adversaire. Le regard qui peut être, je dirais, un petit peu, qui met en situation d'infériorité son adversaire.
And then there are the famous phrases.
Vous n'avez pas, M. Mitterrand, le monopole du cœur. Vous ne l'avez pas.
Moi, président de la République, je ne serai pas le chef de la majorité.
Even with plenty of support behind the candidates, it's necessary to prepare for the debate, as Marine Le Pen proved with her poor performance in 2017.
Ils sont dans les campagnes, dans les villes.
Pour marquer des points dans un débat comme celui-là, il faut être stoïque. Donc, au moment où on va envoyer ce qu'on appelle dans le jargon aujourd'hui des punchlines, il faut vraiment ne pas bouger et regarder son adversaire droit dans les yeux.
Tomorrow's debate will be the second between Emmanuel Macron and Marine Le Pen, following 2017's insult-filled face-off. It's a match neither candidate can afford to lose.
In Sri Lanka, police today shot a protester dead and wounded several others in the first fatal clash with demonstrators taking to the streets to denounce the island nation's economic crisis. Police fired live rounds at a crowd that had blockaded a highway in the central town of Rambukana to protest oil shortages and high prices, according to local authorities. That protest was just one of many gatherings staged around Sri Lanka today after the country's main petrol retailer hiked prices. Well, for weeks, mass rallies have been calling for the resignation of the government, which is preparing to negotiate a bailout with the International Monetary Fund. Explosions targeted boys' schools in the Afghan capital Kabul today in a majority Shiite neighborhood, killing at least 6 people and injuring a dozen more. Police say the blasts at the Abdul Rahim Shahid School and near the Mumtaz Education Center were caused by improvised explosive devices. So far, no group has claimed responsibility, but the neighborhood has been targeted in the past by Sunni militant groups, including Afghanistan's Islamic State affiliate. Our correspondent Nanamu Stephenson reports.
These attacks today clearly show us that still, even though the war is over, Afghans and especially minorities still cannot live in peace and live without fear. The Taliban de facto authorities claim that now that the war is over and they're in power, Afghanistan is a safe country where crime and terrorism fighting is gone. However, the Taliban still has a significant problem with what appears to be the local branch of the Islamic State group. Just this month, we've seen several attacks on Taliban checkpoints and police stations, especially in the southeastern part of the country. And now today we see that despite massive search operations by the Taliban, still groups who intend to kill civilians are capable of carrying out such deadly attacks in the middle of the capital.
Nanamu Stephenson reporting there. Continued political deadlock in Iraq. 6 months after parliamentary elections, the country has still not chosen a president or prime minister. For this, 2/3 of parliament would have to approve a candidate, but a power-sharing dispute between the two largest political blocs has led to a boycott of parliamentary sessions, and quorum has not been reached. The political impasse is being felt not just in parliament, but amongst ordinary citizens as well. Our correspondent Lucille Wasserman has the story.
A
On the outskirts of Baghdad, Mohanad al-Asadi supervises the construction of new roads. Usually the manager has 10 projects going at once, but Iraq's political deadlock has brought most of his work to a standstill.
Most of the funds for infrastructure projects for roads, sewage, electricity, etc. are all funded by the federal budget. Since the government hasn't been formed, the budget hasn't been submitted, let alone approved.
Thousands of projects are stalled across the country, and Mohanad can't hide his frustration with the political impasse.
We went to vote, now it's time for politicians to step up and work together, form a government and move this country forward.
Long delays are typical when forming a government in Iraq, on average lasting 5.5 months. This is a time when political blocs are supposed to negotiate how to share power, but for the first time in nearly 20 years, official discussions are simply not happening because the biggest winner of the elections, Muqtada al-Sadr, refuses to include his rivals, an alliance of pro-Iran parties, in the government.
The system of governance has been consensus-based since 2003, so all components of Iraqi society must agree. Now they want to break this tradition. Well then, it's within our rights to form alliances with other parties and boycott parliamentary sessions.
Neither political bloc has the majority needed to take control of the government. As a result, a stalemate has taken hold in the country, and ordinary citizens are suffering the fallout, especially in low-income neighborhoods where residents rely on government projects to bring about an adequate standard of living.
During elections, we were promised that projects would start as soon as the government was formed. For example, they told us that they were going to get rid of all this landfill so that we could live a normal life. If only you knew how the smell and smoke makes us sick.
There's no guarantee that these promises will be kept should a government be formed. But as long as the status quo remains, a better life for Iraqis is impossible.
And we wrap up this bulletin in the U.S., where a judge has struck down the national mask mandate for planes and public transportation. The decision allows airlines, airports, and mass transit systems to make their own decisions about mask requirements. Some are expected to maintain the rule, while others are set to make masks optional. The judge found that the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention overstepped its authority when it issued the order in February 2021, shortly after President Joe Biden took office. The move has received mixed reactions. It's been hailed by many passengers, but it's also sparked concern in others. The Biden administration, meanwhile, says it's disappointed in the decision. You're watching France 24. Stay with us for more world news headlines.
This corpse of a dolphin is paraded through the streets of Nantes on a stretcher. A stunt with a shock factor to raise public awareness of accidental killings of dolphins by fishing gear every year.
He was caught in fishing gear and the trawler nets. He died of asphyxiation at the bottom of the ocean.
The display makes passers-by halt in their tracks.
We stopped to check and see if it was real, and we were shocked.
That makes us think, for sure.
The NGO behind the operation, Sea Shepherd, faces up to 3 years in prison and a fine of 150,000 euros for the stunt, on the grounds of illegal possession of a protected species. The dolphin was found just the day before, during a patrol on a beach in Vendée. Every day, Anne-Cécile and Grégoire traveled dozens of kilometers along the west coast, searching for stranded dolphin corpses. More than 400 have been found since January. Between December and April, cetaceans flock here in large numbers to hunt fish in the Bay of Biscay, an area much frequented by fishing vessels. Hundreds of marine mammals become accidental prey to nets, becoming entangled and unable to escape. The culprit is non-selective fishing methods. Like pelagic trawling, a huge net in the shape of a cone that moves in the open water scooping up entire schools of fish, and often leading to overexploitation of stocks as well as accidental catches. Criticized for its inaction, the French Ministry of the Sea has set up measures to reduce the bycatch of dolphins. Many trawlers have been equipped with acoustic pinger devices to scare the cetaceans away. But the NGO says this method is flawed in itself.
If we install repellents on all the boats, it will be like chasing the dolphin away from its feeding area. Instead of killing them in a net, we would be killing them by starving them.
Out of a fleet of around 400 gillnetters, 20 vessels volunteered to be equipped with on-board cameras to record what comes up in the nets. A step in the right direction, but rights groups say it isn't yet compulsory for all non-selective fishing vessels.
Fishermen don't play the game enough. We need more transparency in the fishing industry.
Declaring an accidental catch has been mandatory since 2019 for fishermen, failing to do so resulting in a penalty of up to 1,500 euros. According to the ministry, 100 catches were declared for around 4,000 dolphins caught in nets during November 2020 and April 2021. The fishermen we contacted refused to give a comment to France 24, but their union representative says they're working to improve their fishing methods.
We are aware that there's still room for improvement. Each year there are more declarations than the previous one. Some fishermen are worried. Some are afraid that they're going to be singled out. That's why we're here to tell them that it's important to do these declarations. The divisions between NGOs and fishermen exist because we're looking for long-term solutions. But we believe that fishing in harmony with the ecosystem is possible.
So how can we protect marine mammals and keep the fishing industry alive? The economic stakes are enormous. The value of goods auctioned off in the Bay of Biscay represented nearly 380 million euros in 2021. And while the sector is already under pressure by Brexit, many environmentalists are calling for a ban on fishing in certain areas of the Gulf, as well as a return to traditional fishing methods. But such proposals were rejected by the Ministry of the Sea, which says it first wants to compile more data on the issue. For this, the state is working with the Pelagius Observatory, who works for the conservation of marine mammals, collecting data on strandings since 1972.
Vous pensez à réaliser le protocole 2 à côté pour les prélèvements d'écologie?
Here, scientists perform an autopsy on stranded cetaceans in order to establish the cause of death. Reports, photographs, and samples of biological tissue, all elements essential to the research to protect the dolphins from a risk of extinction.
It's estimated that up to 6,700 common dolphins have died every year on average since 2016. We now know that catch thresholds are probably not sustainable for the population, so there is a very important conservation issue here.
Nearly 100,000 dolphins have drowned in nets in France alone in the last 30 years. To tackle the issue, the state has just launched a new research program to be conducted over the next 3 years.
It towers over the Baie des Anges facing the Mediterranean. In Nice, the Negresco sits majestically on the Promenade des Anglais. But beyond its main entrance, this jewel of the Belle Époque is more than just a luxury hotel. From the ground floor all the way up to the 5th, works of art are everywhere. Eiffel stained glass, Baccarat chandeliers, the impressive Nana by Niki de Saint-Phal, and the highlight of the collection, the official portrait of Louis XIV. Nearly 6,000 pieces on display and 124 rooms in total. Running this unique hotel is a staff numbering 170 in total. Service needs to be impeccable, commensurate with the 5-star status. On every floor, employees are kept busy from morning to night.
If there's no answer, we can go in.
To avoid any unpleasant surprises.
Precisely.
Each maid is responsible for cleaning 11 rooms a day. Time is precious.
About 40 minutes per room.
Is that enough, or is it a rush?
No, you have to work well and quickly.
The uniforms are black and white for the maids, blue, white, and red for the concierges.
And the final touch, my tailcoat.
Here, the old-fashioned look of a well-to-do household is deliberately cultivated.
Elegance is French class. I call it my bullfighter's costume. We put on our pretty costume, go out there, and we're ready to play the part.
And Olivier Macron's stage?
The Negresco concierge speaking, good evening.
Is the hotel lobby.
I'll take care about it. And I give you the map. Thank you so much. Have a nice evening. See you later. Bye-bye.
Faithful to their posts, many employees have been here for a long time. Mark holds the record.
One coffee and one cappuccino, Marco, please.
I received the big gold medal for 40 years' service.
He walked into the Negresco at the age of 17 for a summer job and never left. He knew the hotel's last owner, an old-school-style boss very well.
Sometimes she called me and say, "How's my little one? Is everything okay?" She was feisty. She could be quite authoritarian. When she had a bee in her bonnet, she never let it go, and she did things her own way. The boss was the boss.
The boss in question was Jeanne Augier, who passed away in 2019. A businesswoman like no other, she bought the luxury hotel in 1957, obsessed with the idea of restoring the Negresco to its former glory. Personally supervising the renovations, she bought period furniture and pieces of art. Her credo was to highlight French savoir-faire.
Les gens viennent ici en sachant qu'en principe, ils vont découvrir une ambiance qu'ils ne trouvent pas ailleurs. J'ai pensé que cet hôtel devait être la représentation permanente de l'art français à travers nos différentes époques, auprès de nos clients étrangers.
Jeanne Augier gave the Negresco a soul, a trademark that still attracts visitors from all over the world. Not to mention locals, like this gentleman from Nice, who has always had a passion for the luxury hotel. He grew up just a block away from his 5-star neighbor. He knew all about the Negresco's splendors through the anecdotes told by friends who worked at the hotel. So for him, a visit to the Negresco is a dream come true.
It still really means something for a resident of Nice to be able to walk into the Negresco, have a meal or a drink, or book a room. It means you've made enough of a success of your life to be able to dine at the Negresco, which welcomes the great and the good.
Every evening, customers can come to sample the hotel chef's latest creations.
It's a whole cauliflower with grated bataga and chamula. A cauliflower can make a 2-star dish, absolutely. Like any ingredient, as long as it's well treated and respected.
Cauliflower smoked using beechwood. It's the tiny details that set it apart.
Ah, beautiful. Very good, amazing. Very good.
Kind of a meat texture to it. It's very delicious.
Gentlemen, we continue with this delicacy.
In the Michelin-starred restaurant,
crispy on the outside,
gourmets also appreciate the French service with its attentive maître d'hôtel.
We knew it would be an outstanding evening, in outstanding surroundings, with outstanding service. So it's a combination of everything.
Voilà. Eh bien, si ça vous a donné satisfaction, je suis ravie.
Before her passing, The former owner's last wish was for the Negresco to carry on being one of the few totally independent luxury hotels in France.
For this week's France in Focus, we've flown to a Mediterranean outcrop that many refer to as the Island of Beauty. But Corsica is also an island of tensions, with a proud nationalist movement gaining ground once again following the death of the jailed assassin Yvon Colonna. Join us as we head from the seafront in the capital to the university town of Corte to unpick the recent crisis and the calls for change. France in Focus on France 24 and France24.com. Liberté, égalité, actualité.
Russia ramps up its offensive to take control of eastern Ukraine, intensifying assaults along a front hundreds of kilometers long in what officials on both sides describe as a new phase of the war. Our correspondent reports live from Kyiv. Here in France, incumbent Emmanuel Macron and his far-right rival Marine Le Pen gear up for the last week of campaigning ahead of the second round of the presidential election this Sunday. Both candidates particularly focused on a high-stakes televised debate tomorrow. And explosions target schools in a Shiite-majority neighborhood in Kabul, killing at least 6 and injuring several students. Police say they fear the death toll may continue to rise. So far, no group has claimed responsibility. You're watching France 24. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Claire Brush. Russia carried out dozens of airstrikes in eastern Ukraine on Monday night as it launches a larger offensive to take control of the Donbass region. Well, according to Kyiv, Russian forces have been trying this Tuesday to push through Ukrainian defenses along the eastern front line, which stretches for some 480 kilometers. And in the first reported success of Russia's new assault, Ukraine said the Russians had seized Kreminna, a frontline town in Luhansk province. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says Moscow is now expected to concentrate on this assault, which he has called the battle for Donbass. Well, our correspondent Gulliver Gragg is standing by for us in Kyiv. We can cross to him now. Gulliver, you just got back to the Ukrainian capital. What did you see on the way?
Well, we were allowed to drive along the main highway that goes west from Kiev, which was closed for weeks because it was the scene of intense fighting. It's now reopened because the Russian forces have, of course, left this region, and you can see so much of the traces of what went on there. Destroyed warehouses, destroyed petrol stations, and still quite a lot of destroyed Russian armor, tanks and other military vehicles. These are the Russian units which suffered really severe losses in Kiev region and other parts of northern Ukraine, and which are now expected to regroup and be redeployed to the Donbass, where this Russian offensive is ongoing. According to the Ukrainian army and also to the President Volodymyr Zelensky, it has entered now its intense phase, the big push to take the whole of Donetsk and Luhansk regions, if you like. So far, they haven't really made any major gains apart from this one town of Kreminna, but intense fighting is reported inside the strategic towns of Popasna, for example, and then bombardment and artillery fire on the cities of Rubizhne, Severodonetsk and Lysychansk. These are key cities in Luhansk region that the Russians are very, very close to. But then there are the Ukrainian-held cities in Donetsk region that they very much want to take control of as well, particularly Kramatorsk and Slavyansk. They're still some way off those cities, but they seem to be trying to effect a pincer movement around them coming in from the south and the north. And it really remains to be seen, and it maybe will be seen in the next few days, just how much the losses they suffered in Kiev region and Chernihiv region in northern Ukraine are going to impact the Russians' ability to carry out this offensive in eastern Ukraine.
All right, Gulliver Craig reporting for us there. Thanks for that update, Gulliver. Well, meanwhile, in Mariupol, Russia is calling on Ukrainian forces defending the besieged city to surrender. Moscow says it has opened a humanitarian corridor to leave the city for Ukrainian troops who agree to lay down their arms. Ukrainian forces in Mariupol ignored a previous such ultimatum on Sunday. The Azovstal steel plant there is believed to be the last base of Ukrainian fighters in Mariupol. Local authorities say scores of civilians are in underground shelters beneath the plant. Mariupol has been devastated by weeks of siege, a key target for Russia. It offers a land bridge between Moscow-controlled parts of eastern Ukraine and the Kremlin-annexed peninsula of Crimea. Well, as that battle for the control of eastern Ukraine gets underway, religion is also playing its role. At the front line and in the rear, military chaplains are at the side of soldiers to help maintain their morale. This report from our team in Kyiv.
At a military base in Kiev, Father Andriy, a chaplain in the Ukrainian army, conducts a service for soldiers. The church is packed. Many of those here are about to leave for the east to the Donbass, where Russian troops are massing for a new offensive.
Храм є одним із тих місць, де ти можеш прийти, заспокоїтися, бути спокійним душею, де тебе завжди підтримують. У нас є дуже добрий чоловік, отець Андрій. Він любій людині допоможе, підтримає. Для того, щоб підтримати, я стараюся частіше усміхатися, щоб передавати їм цей позитив, цю радість. Господь сам покладає інколи на серце, що потрібно сказати для того, щоб якось підтримати людину.
On this Orthodox Palm Sunday, he's there to share a smile with the soldiers and bless them before they part to join the battle in the east. The church is
to not hiring, funding or sponsoring perpetrators of sexist and sexual violence.
And watching that report with me is Megan Clemente, Paris-based journalist and editor of the Impact newsletter. A reminder there, once again, Megan, that until we have equality in the world of politics, then women's rights will always be an afterthought.
Unfortunately, it does seem like that's the case, and we do have a problem with sexism politics in this country, as we've seen. It's often a very hostile space for women. France is doing better. It's got the highest proportion of seats held by women than it's ever had currently, but it's still around 38%, so it's not close to parity as it should be. And the Me Too politics movement has really shone a light on the kind of behavior that women, and not just women politicians, but women parliamentary assistants, anyone who works in that space, any woman that works in that space, often has to face just to do their jobs.
Megan Clement, it's been great having you here. Thank you so much again for your time.
Thank you very much.
And that's all for now. You can get in touch and keep up with the 51% on Facebook, Instagram or Twitter, and you can catch our previous programs on the France 24 website. So until our next show, bye for now.
Everything you do on the web leaves a footprint. When you look for directions, post on social media, or subscribe to an app, all your information is compiled, stored, checked and analysed by tech giants.
You have to think about their business model is collect as much information as possible so that they can then sell that information who wants to find exactly you.
Across the world, citizens are striving to protect their privacy.
There are many, many ways that you can remain confidential even in this hyper-connected world with a lot of state surveillance.
So, is it only possible to go under the radar to cover your online tracks? We've got the guide on Reporters Plus. Join us on France 24 and France24.com.
Because a new page of history gets written every day. Because breaking news can't wait. Information everywhere. In all situations. On every subject. Understanding the world. Imagining the world. France 24. A different take on the news.
Liberté, égalité, actualité.
Hello and welcome. You're watching France 24. Coming up, the Battle of Donbass, Russian forces on the attack all along the front line in eastern Ukraine. Meanwhile, Western allies due to confer as part of the race to rearm Kyiv in the face of a fresh offensive. We'll be crossing live to France 24's Gulliver Crag there. In Sri Lanka, the first fatality as police fire live ammunition on protesters who for weeks have been rallying in ever greater numbers against oil shortages and high prices. Correspondent Vodita Kumari has more on that. And Emmanuel Macron and Marine Le Pen take time out from the campaign trail to cram for Wednesday's candidates' debate. This as the incumbent widens the gap in the polls over his far-right challenger. Later, we'll be speaking with U.S. Senator Chris Coons of Delaware. He's in Paris. He's a close ally of Joe Biden. Ukraine, top of the agenda for a visiting congressional delegation here. In the next hour, the France 24 debate, conquer the Donbass or flatten it? What is Vladimir Putin's endgame as the war enters a new phase? Russia's president needs a win. What if he doesn't get one soon? Your reactions on Facebook and Twitter. Hashtag F24debate. Hello, everyone. I'm François Picard. Russia launching attacks along hundreds of kilometers up and down the eastern front in Ukraine. Moscow, which failed in its bid for a quick grab of the capital after the February 24th invasion, now concentrating on the Donbass. It's on, but according to Washington's assessment, what we're witnessing this Tuesday is just a prelude to what could be a much larger offensive. Kathy Kadir-Clifford has more.
After a heavy night of bombing, emergency workers clear the remains of houses in Sumy in northeastern Ukraine. The Russian Defense Ministry says its troops hit 60 Ukrainian military sites overnight after Moscow began a major new offensive in the Donbass region on Monday evening.
The operation in the east of Ukraine is aimed, as was announced from the very beginning, to fully liberate the Donetsk and Lugansk republics.
The eastern region is mostly Russian-speaking, and Moscow-backed separatists have been fighting Ukrainian forces there for the past 8 years. Russian forces seized the eastern city of Kreminna this Tuesday. The regional governor said Ukrainian troops have withdrawn from the city. Meanwhile, in the south of Donbass, fighting has escalated in the besieged port city of Mariupol. The Kremlin is focusing its war efforts on capturing this region after its attempt to storm Kiev failed. Its forces are now attacking Ukrainian positions along the 480-kilometer front line.
Російські окупанти активізували наступальні дії уздовж всієї лінії зіткнення. Основні зусилля ворога зосереджені на прориві оборони наших військ у Луганській та Донецькій областях, а також встановленні повного контролю над містом Маріуполь.
At this hospice in the Donetsk region, residents were evacuated ahead of the new assault. Ukrainian authorities urged people in Donbass to flee west, even as officials called off evacuations for a third straight day from frontline cities due to ongoing fighting.
Well, for more, let's cross to Ukraine's capital and France 24 correspondent Gulliver Crag. Gulliver, yeah, the Washington saying it's only a prelude, what we're witnessing. Still, there are reports of thousands of Russian troops on the move.
Well, and there are apparently 11 more battalion tactical groups that have been added to the Russian forces in eastern Ukraine in recent days. And the Ukrainian armed forces, the Ukrainian president, and also the Russian foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov, say that a new phase in this war seems to have started. The Russians are attacking with greater intensity and clearly trying to take control of towns and villages in Donetsk and Luhansk regions. With one success so far, they've managed to take Kreminna, which is a town situated to the west or northwest of Severodonetsk, which is the largest Ukrainian-controlled city in Luhansk region, a highly strategic city in which has been under severe bombardment for weeks now, like most of the towns in the region. But you've also got these US experts saying this is not as intense as it's going to get, and that Russia is planning to send yet more troops into these regions. Apparently there are 22 battalion tactical groups just on the other side of the Russian border in Russia and ready to be deployed into eastern Ukraine. One of the big questions, though, is how combat ready are these forces if they're reconstituted from Russian units that were fighting in Kiev region and in Chernihiv region, where they suffered really severe losses and a pretty crushing defeat. It's not clear what their physical state is, what the state of their equipment is, and what their morale level is.
Yeah, and there's another element of surprise here, Gulliver. Political reporting that this offensive, many thought it would happen once Mariupol had fallen. Mariupol, where there are still 12 Russian battalion tactical groups tied down in fighting.
Yes, and so although the Ukrainians have really only still kept control of a small part of Mariupol, basically their forces and a number of civilians are holed up in the Azovstal steelworks area. They are still, the fact that they're still fighting means that they are as it were, Russian military resources are being deployed to Mariupol, who could otherwise, if Mariupol had been fully taken by the Russians, presumably be deployed further north in other parts of Donetsk and Luhansk regions. So that's one reason, I think, why the Ukrainians are still holding out, even though the city has been substantially destroyed, and their chances of holding on to Mariupol in the long run seem pretty slim, though they can probably hold on to the Azov steelworks for a pretty long time, because, of course, it's a very easy place to defend. It's a massive steelworks with lots of underground bunkers and tunnels. Apparently, they are pretty well equipped in there by various, according to various reports. So it may be a bit like Donetsk airport, actually, in 2014, if you remember, this sort of one holdout that the Ukrainians hold on to for a very long time, diverting Russian forces. It seems that the Russians have decided to proceed with their offensive elsewhere in Donetsk and Luhansk regions anyway, perhaps because they are in a hurry to meet the May 9th deadline. May 9th is Victory Day in Russia, marking the end of the Second World War, of course, and Vladimir Putin very much wants to have a military parade in which they will have at least some kind of victory to, as it were, celebrate on that day.
All right, so a May 9th deadline on the Russian side and a race to rearm on the Ukrainian side. There was a meeting due to take place this Tuesday between Joe Biden and other Western leaders to talk about this issue of how to best arm the Ukrainians. I know that where you are, there's a long wish list.
Yes, the Ukrainians very much want heavy weaponry, above all. They want tanks and they want artillery. They want Grad multiple rocket launchers. They also, I think, want more of these lighter weapons, which are the Javelins and NLAWs, shoulder-mounted anti-tank weapons. They are on an absolute push to try to get their Western allies to send them more weapons. They clearly think it's absolutely crucial. At the same time, they don't want it to be made all that public what weapons are arriving and when, obviously, because the Russians have explicitly said that they want to destroy foreign weapons that are arriving in Ukraine and claim to have already destroyed some of them in these airstrikes that are happening all over the country that may appear random, but they're probably aimed at targeting places where the Russians think that these weapons are being stored or transported. The Ukrainians, of course, deny that any of the weapons recently supplied by its foreign partners have actually been destroyed by these Russian strikes.
Gulliver Cragg reporting live from the Ukrainian capital. Many thanks for that update. Now, we've reported on the fact that the Russian Orthodox Church has gone all in behind Vladimir Putin. What about on the other side? France 24's Robert Parsons and Sylvain Rousseau met with military chaplains and those who are going to the front on the Ukrainian side.
At a military base in Kiev, Father Andriy, a chaplain in the Ukrainian army, conducts a service for soldiers. The church is packed. Many of those here are about to leave for the east to the Donbass, where Russian troops are massing for a new offensive.
Храм є одним із тих місць, де ти можеш прийти, заспокоїтися, бути спокійним душею, де тебе завжди підтримують. У нас є дуже добрий чоловік, отець Андрій. Він любій людині допоможе, підтримає. Для того, щоб підтримати, я стараюся частіше усміхатися, щоб передавати їм цей позитив, цю радість. Господь сам покладає інколи на серце, що потрібно сказати для того, щоб якось підтримати людину.
On this Orthodox Palm Sunday, he's there to share a smile with the soldiers and bless them before they part to join the battle in the east. The church is supporting the war effort in other ways too, collecting food, clothes and medicines for the troops. Olga is a doctor with the Ukrainian Air Force.
А наших бійців ми приїжджаємо сюди, щоб отримати медикаменти для їхнього відновлення, їхнього здоров'я, для відновлення їхнього стану і для їх реабілітації.
Що віра без діл мертва. У нас в храмі віра, внизу у нас тут діла. І діла необхідні, потрібні, тому що тут є.
Father Andriy is as much psychologist as priest, and never more so than when he departs for the front to be with the soldiers in their greatest hour of need.
Хто підходив, каже, а де ваша зброя? А я кажу, ось вона моя зброя.
It's one of the ironies of this war that Vladimir Putin has consolidated the Ukrainian people as never before. Russian speakers and Ukrainian speakers, Orthodox believers, Protestants, Catholics and Muslims, all united in their determination to control their own destiny. But first, they have a battle to win in the Donbass.
Weeks of spiraling protests against Sri Lanka's economic meltdown entering a new phase this Tuesday with the first fatality. At least one killed after police fired live rounds at a crowd that had blockaded a railway line and highway that connects the capital Colombo with the central city of Kandy. For more, let's cross now to regional correspondent Navadita Kumari. Navadita, what's the latest?
Yes, exactly. Local reports have confirmed that at least one person has been killed and 24 others have been injured when police opened fire. What they claim was to disperse the crowd which were blocking Rambukana railway crossing. They have said that they had to only start firing because the situation was getting tense. These injured people have been taken to hospitals and a couple of them are believed to be in critical condition. Just to remind our viewers that this is the first shooting by security forces since these demonstrations started weeks ago against the rising prices of food, fuel, and rolling power cuts. At the same time, the government has called the army to put the situation under control. Some vehicles have also been set on fire, and some social media footage show ambulances are rushing to the spot. At the same time, several other protests are taking place across the country, especially one massive protest organized by the opposition JVP is marching towards Colombo. So for the moment, we don't know what will be the repercussions of this violent attack by the police on these protesters. But for the moment, these agitators are determined to continue the protest against this government.
Yeah, and while this is happening in Colombo, President Rajapaksa pledging reforms, dispatching his finance minister to Washington to ask the IMF for a bailout and promising that the reforms have already begun.
Yes, exactly. Sri Lankan Finance Minister Ali Sabri is in Washington for talks with the International Monetary Fund. On Monday, he asked for an emergency financial help from the IMF, which the IMF said that it is considering. And it just happened after the country defaulted its foreign debts for the first time in its history. At the same time, the Indian Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman is also in Washington, where she met Ali Sabri and said that India will extend all cooperation and help to its neighboring country. Meanwhile, politically, what we saw yesterday is that the President Gotabaya Rajapaksa added 17 new cabinet members among the ongoing protest. Surprisingly, none of them are from his family, but him and his elder brother, Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa, continue to stay in power despite these protests. So we do not know what is the situation is going to be, and if at all they will be able to bring the situation under control and bring in political and economical stability, which the country desperately needs right now.
Many thanks for that live update there. Navodita Kumari reporting. Here in France, it's the mad dash to the finish in the presidential runoff campaign. Incumbent Emmanuel Macron against the far-right's Marine Le Pen, a rematch of 2017. In the latest poll, Emmanuel Macron stretching slightly his lead by 13 points now over Le Pen. The second round, something of a mad dash after the marathon that is campaigning for the first round to make that a runoff. And there's a highlight. The highlight is Wednesday's candidates debate. It's got both candidates off the trail and cramming.
This is the set where the French presidential debate will be held. For this crucial face-off, everything has been agreed upon in advance by the two campaigns. Gone is the large desk shared by Emmanuel Macron and Marine Le Pen during the 2017 debate. In its place, two smaller desks, one for each candidate, spaced 2.5 meters apart. The two journalists moderating will be seated together 4 meters away.
It's very different from an interview. It's really a job, a moderator role. It's not really a journalist wanting to interview to follow up. The priority is to be serious and humble.
But will the debate have an impact on voters?
I haven't made my choice. I'm expecting a lot. I'm expecting details from the two candidates.
It won't change my decision. I'll watch it mostly because I'm curious, not really to decide.
I don't think I'm going to watch because I'm not really expecting much. It's two candidates that I really don't like at all.
To ensure fairness, the candidates drew lots to decide where they will sit on set and who will get to speak first. Marine Le Pen will be on the right, and she will start off the debate. The studio temperature, too, was agreed upon, 19 degrees Celsius, to avoid sweating on air. 16 cameras will be used to film the proceedings. In 2017, 16.5 million French people followed the debate, the lowest audience figure since 1974.
Well, for more, we're joined by France 24 politics editor Mark Perlman. Mark, let's get a little geeky here and technical. We saw in that Catherine Viette's report, room temperature 19 degrees so that they don't sweat. Okay, we know that. An important detail in 2017 was the first time where you'd seen a candidates debate where the director kind of had free range, cutaways, so you can see the reaction shot of the other person while the one candidate is talking. You see the other's reaction. This time, it's more closely monitored.
Yes, because this didn't favor Marine Le Pen last time around. The cutaways showed her looking at her notes, looking up when Emmanuel Macron was speaking, and so her camp negotiated to really limit the cutaways and make sure they're evenly distributed. And so this is why they wanted a director who they know they signed a chart. Everything is written down. We'll avoid this because obviously the optics were very bad for Marine Le Pen. She admitted that it was her worst political moment ever, not because of those cutaways, but also because she appeared over-aggressive. She tried to destabilize Emmanuel Macron. People tend to forget. In 2017, he was a political rookie. And so the assumption was that Marine Le Pen had an edge because she was already a seasoned politician. So she tried to be extremely aggressive, and this backfired because Emmanuel Macron was well prepared. He knew his stuff much better than Marine Le Pen. And so this totally backfired against her.
Now, we heard the narrative of the first round of the campaign. Marine Le Pen softening her tone on the not talking as much about identity politics, talking more about cost of living and retail politics, if you will. This debate, though, will be a moment of truth because there'll be no skirting the issues.
Yes, absolutely. And this first week of campaigning for round two has already been much more a moment of truth and has been rather uncomfortable for Marine Le Pen because she campaigned until the first round under the radar. very quiet campaign, small rallies, going to small towns, small villages, talking about the cost of living, forgetting about immigration, forgetting about Islam. Also, because there was another far-right candidate, Éric Zemmour, who really was banging on those issues night and day. And so she flew under the radar, but now she's already been confronted on some of her positions, shifting position on the death penalty. One day, yes, I'd like to put it to a referendum, then actually no, then the veil, I want to ban it from all public space, and 2 days later, well, actually no, we'll see when we get there. So she better be really prepared, because Emmanuel Macron is going to hammer her on those issues, and obviously is going to hammer her on her perceived closeness to Vladimir Putin.
All right, a 13-point lead now. It's stretched by a point since we spoke 24 hours ago. Nonetheless, he does have one weakness that he's got to watch out for. He's already been labeled the president of the rich and a little bit out of touch. He's got to not appear like a know-it-all.
Absolutely. President of the rich is one. The other is the arrogant president, the man who knows everything, who wants to deal with everything, manage everything, and that everything goes back to him. And that's his form of governance, and that's been a weakness. So he has to make sure against Marine Le Pen that he's not looking down at her, that he doesn't despise her. He has sometimes made off-the-cuff remarks with people on the streets. He's already regretted them, but then again made those remarks. So he has to control himself. Basically, all he needs is a draw, because the polls are showing that he has now a sizable lead.
All he needs to draw, or all she needs to draw? I asked the question because
no, she needs to win.
As you said at the outset, wait a minute, you said at the outset that she performed so poorly last time that even if she performs moderately well, it will seem like a win.
Yes, but it would be a win if the polls were really very tight. Now that the polls are showing 12 to 13 point lead for Emmanuel Macron, she needs to win that debate, because there's very little time left. The campaign ends on Friday. Tomorrow is already Wednesday. So she really needs to make something happen in this debate to swing back the momentum in her favor. She was rising in the polls before round one. Since then, Emmanuel Macron has been eating up her lead, and so she needs to make something happen on Wednesday. Obviously, you'll be able to watch it here live at 9 p.m. Paris time on France 24.
Indeed, 9 p.m. Paris time on Wednesday is the date, and you'll see in full that candidates debate between Emmanuel Macron and Marine LePen. How long will they be debating? Is it about 2 hours?
2 hours, or it could be longer.
It could, yeah, it did go longer last time.
Yes, absolutely.
All right, 2 hours.
16 million viewers last time around, so we'll see what happens this Wednesday.
It will be the highlight again of this second round race. Many thanks, Mark Perlman. Well, in France, they're picking a president. In Iraq, they're still picking a government. And this 6 months after the elections, the political impasse is not something new after an election in Iraq, but it's really beginning to rub citizens the wrong way. Correspondent Lucille Wasserman has more.
On the outskirts of Baghdad, Mohanad al-Asadi supervises the construction of new roads. Usually the manager has 10 projects going at once, but Iraq's political deadlock has brought most of his work to a standstill.
Most of the funds for infrastructure projects for roads, sewage, electricity, etc. are all funded by the federal budgets. Since the government hasn't been formed, the budget hasn't been submitted, let alone approved.
Thousands of projects are stalled across the country, and Mohanad can't hide his frustration with the political impasse.
We went to vote, now it's time for politicians to step up and work together, form a government and move this country forward.
Long delays are typical when forming a government in Iraq, on average lasting 5.5 months. This is a time when political blocs are supposed to negotiate how to share power, but for the first time in nearly 20 years, official discussions are simply not happening because the biggest winner of the elections, Muqtada al-Sadr, refuses to include his rivals, an alliance of pro-Iran parties, in the government.
The system of governance has been consensus-based since 2003, so all components of Iraqi society must agree. Now they want to break this tradition. Well then, it's within our rights to form alliances with other parties and boycott parliamentary sessions.
Neither political bloc has the majority needed to take control of the government. As a result, a stalemate has taken hold in the country, and ordinary citizens are suffering the fallout, especially in low-income neighborhoods where residents rely on government projects to bring about an adequate standard of living.
During elections, we were promised that projects would start as soon as the government was formed. For example, they told us that they were going to get rid of all this landfill so that we could live a normal life. If only you knew how the smell and smoke makes us sick.
There's no guarantee that these promises will be kept should a government be formed. But as long as the status quo remains, a better life for Iraqis is impossible.
More news coming up here on France 24. We'll also be speaking with U.S. Senator Chris Coons. He's in Paris, part of a congressional delegation. Ukraine, top of the agenda. Chris Coons, close ally of Joe Biden. That's coming up just after the break.
Bienvenidos a las noticias de France 24.
Thanks very much for joining us. أهلا بكم في ثقافة في عدد اليوم. Ravi de vous retrouver pour Afrique Hebdo. Au programme cette semaine. نسمع بين حين والآخر. This storm has hit New York City a lot.
To be a president. 3, 2, 1.
Madagascar fait face à une seconde vague meurtrière.
Almost 99 million of you watch us every week. So thank you. Shukran.
Gracias. Your confidence means a lot to us.
Muchas gracias.
شكرا على هذه الثقة.
Thank you. Merci du fond de mon cœur.
Liberté, égalité, actualité. liberté, égalité, actualité.
Welcome back. You're watching France 24. Coming up, the Battle of Donbass. Russian forces on the attack all along the front line in eastern Ukraine. Meanwhile, Western allies conferring as part of the race to rearm Kyiv in the face of that fresh offensive. We'll be crossing shortly to U.S. Senator Chris Coons of Delaware, a close ally of Joe Biden. Ukraine top of the agenda for his visiting congressional delegation that's here in Paris. Oil prices drop after the International Monetary Fund cuts its global growth forecast from 4.4 to 3.6%. The slowdown blamed largely on Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Kate Moody will have all of the day's business news. Yeah, Russia's launched attacks along hundreds of kilometers up and down the eastern front in Ukraine. Moscow, which failed in its bid last month back in February rather, for a quick grab of the capital after that February 24th invasion, it's now concentrating on the Donbass. According to Washington's assessment, the fighting we're seeing this Tuesday is only a prelude to what could be a much larger offensive. Kathy Hadir-Clifford has more.
After a heavy night of bombing, emergency workers clear the remains of houses in Sumy in northeastern Ukraine. The Russian Defense Ministry says its troops hit 60 Ukrainian military sites overnight after Moscow began a major new offensive in the Donbass region on Monday evening.
The operation in the east of Ukraine is aimed, as was announced from the very beginning, to fully liberate the Donetsk and Lugansk republics.
The eastern region is mostly Russian-speaking, and Moscow-backed separatists have been fighting Ukrainian forces there for the past 8 years. Russian forces seized the eastern city of Ukraina this Tuesday. The regional governor said Ukrainian troops have withdrawn from the city. Meanwhile, in the south of Donbass, fighting has escalated in the besieged port city of Mariupol. The Kremlin is focusing its war efforts on capturing this region after its attempt to storm Kiev failed. Its forces are now attacking Ukrainian positions along the 480-kilometer front line.
Російські окупанти активізували наступальні дії уздовж всієї лінії зіткнення. Основні зусилля ворога зосереджені на прориві оборони наших військ у Луганській та Донецькій областях, а також встановленні повного контролю над містом Маріуполь.
At this hospice in the Donetsk region, residents were evacuated ahead of the new assault. Ukrainian authorities urged people in Donbass to flee west, even as officials called off evacuations for a third straight day from frontline cities due to ongoing fighting.
Moscow's issued a fresh ultimatum to the last troops holding out in the besieged port city of Mariupol. Surrender or die, they say. James Mulholland has more on the fighting concentrated around a steelworks compound.
Refusing to surrender, the Azovstal steel plant, one of the last known pockets of resistance in Mariupol. And now it's the focus of Russian bombardment in the flattened port city as Moscow steps up its offensive to take the east of Ukraine. Alongside what's left of the city's resistance, there are also reportedly more than 1,000 civilians taking shelter underground.
There are hundreds of civilians in the Azovstal factory. Among them are many women, children and the elderly. Russian occupiers are aware that civilians are here, yet they are still dropping bunker-buster bombs, rockets and every possible artillery shell, including from warships.
Prokopenko appealed to world leaders to push for a humanitarian corridor to allow civilians to flee and to allow families to bury their dead with dignity. Officials in Kyiv said Russian warplanes were preparing to drop 5-ton bombs on the Azovstal plant. Nearly 2 months after invading Ukraine, Vladimir Putin's troops have been forced to regroup and concentrate their assault on the eastern Donbass region. The key city of Mariupol would allow them to complete a land bridge between the occupied Crimean Peninsula and forces in separatist-held regions of Donetsk and Luhansk.
Western allies have been meeting in the past hour to discuss how to rearm Ukraine. So far, tight-lipped over what exactly they're committing in terms of heavier armament. What we are beginning to piece together is what happened to the flagship of the Russian Navy in the Black Sea, the Moskva, that went down last week. It's a report by our partner station France 2, read by Sinead McCausland.
These are images from the last moments of the Moskva, Russia's military flagship. The front of the ship is on fire. Fire hoses have been switched on. The ship is sinking into the Black Sea. To confirm the authenticity of the images, they've been compared with several other photos of the Moskva. It's a match. The Russian cruiser was briefly filmed by rescue services. But for the Kremlin, this is not enough proof to confirm the pictures show their now sunken warship.
We have seen the images, but cannot confirm their authenticity.
Moscow continues to downplay what happened, claiming an ammunition explosion had caused a fire on board, and not a Ukrainian Neptune anti-ship missile. Monday, the Russian Defense Ministry released this video. It reportedly shows around 100 survivors of the sunken ship, but there are still around 400 crew members unaccounted for. A father of one of the crew members who's still missing has had no news from officials on the whereabouts of his son. He's shared his anger on Facebook.
It was reported that the entire crew had been evacuated. It's a lie, a blatant and cynical lie.
In an interview with an independent Russian journalist, the mother of a crew member who survived the sinking claims there are about 40 dead. Russian authorities remain silent. In a call with Sevastopol's military hospital, they refused to say how many people had been injured. Sevastopol's cathedral also held back information. Despite increasing calls from families for more information on what happened, for now it remains a state secret.
Ukraine top of the agenda for a visiting congressional delegation that's here in Paris. Heading that delegation is U.S. Senator from Delaware, Chris Coons, the home state of U.S. President Joe Biden, a close ally of the president. Thank you for speaking with us here on France 24. Welcome to Paris.
Thank you. Great to be with you.
So we've had in the last hour Western leaders conferring on how to best rearm Ukraine. Last week there was that announcement out of Washington, $800 million worth of hardware. What more needs to be done now?
Well, that $800 million, which President Biden authorized, has just been delivered over the last 2 days, and it includes some advanced weapon systems, 155-millimeter howitzers, armored personnel carriers, and others that have been requested by President Zelensky. There are more weapon systems that we can be sending that will help anti-air, anti-ship, defensive missile systems, and other advanced material, including armor. Frankly, the other thing that we are talking about here, both in France and we will be in Italy in the few days ahead, is the importance of sustaining Western unity. President Biden has done a tremendous job of bringing together, of strengthening, and of partnering with our European allies. We're here in Paris, where the oldest alliance between the United States and a European country began. We'll never forget the help that the French Republic gave as we were fighting our own revolution for independence. And I'm looking forward to a number of important meetings with senior French leaders tomorrow, where we'll be talking about how we can strengthen, deepen, and sustain sanctions, in particular energy sanctions, how we can continue our cooperation in the Sahel, in West Africa, in security, and most critically, what we can do together to make sure that we are pushing back on Putin's aggression in Ukraine.
You mentioned the Sahel, where the French are present, and so is the United States, by the way, in fighting jihadist insurgents. The French don't have an army the size of the United States. So how much more can a country like France do? I ask you the question, Senator, because we've heard in the last hour Germany's chancellor saying they've reached the limit of what they can deliver from the Germans' armed forces own stocks.
Well, one of the big surprises in recent weeks has been just how forceful Chancellor Scholz and the new German government has been in cutting off Nord Stream 2, in providing lethal aid. But one of the things our administration, President Biden and his senior security team are doing is talking to the companies that provide defense material for the United States. We do have the largest military budget in the world. We have a robust military supply system. And I think the United States can and will provide more critically needed resupply for the ongoing fight by the Ukrainian armed forces to resist Russian aggression.
Never during the Cold War did we see the Soviet Union have this invasion followed by a sustained war inside of Europe. Yes, we saw Soviet tanks march into countries, but this is unprecedented. At what point, and you talked about it a little bit last week, at what point does NATO get drawn in with boots on the ground?
Well, that's something that I think we need to be discussing is how far Putin will go as this war evolves. When I said that Putin will only stop when we stop him, I meant we, the West, we, the nations that have come to Ukraine's aid, which is not just the members of NATO. I'll remind you, the Swiss have imposed banking sanctions for the first time. The Swedes and the Finns are seriously talking about joining NATO and are providing material support to the Ukrainians. We don't know where this war is going, but my question that I raised last week was in response to the crimes against humanity that we're seeing committed by Russian troops against Ukrainian civilians. So I am not calling for U.S. troops to be sent into Ukraine, but I am calling for the West to be clear-eyed about how hard and how long this conflict might be, and to not turn away, to pull together, to impose sustained and fierce sanctions against Russia, and to provide the sort of advanced weapons that Ukraine needs. Even when our stocks are challenged, I think we're going to need to dig deep and to find ways to provide that supply and those weapons for the Ukrainian resistance.
Yeah, we have the Pentagon in the past hour, which is assessing that they believe that the Russian military has lost a quarter of its active manpower. Vladimir Putin has set himself this May 9th deadline to get a result. If he doesn't get that result, should we be concerned about chemical weapons attacks, or dare we say it, a tactical nuclear strike of some kind?
Well, Vladimir Putin himself has threatened that he would resort to using his nuclear arsenal. He has made both vague and fairly specific threats. And of course we have to be concerned about that. None of us know how far he's willing to go, how far his military would go. But if you look at the history of the brutal war in Chechnya, of the war that still continues in Syria, and the conduct of Russian troops in those wars, that is a grim reminder of a history that may repeat itself. So it is my hope that we will find the courage.
Is it within the realm of the plausible that, for instance, we might see as a warning shot some kind of strike and some kind of a nuclear test in the Baltic Sea from Kaliningrad?
Look, there's lots of possibilities, and we need to be prepared for them, and we need to be consulting and coordinating around them. One of the things that has made us strong as the West is our unity. President Biden and his senior team have done a tremendous job of consulting, coming to a common position, and then pushing back against Putin's aggression. It's entirely possible that we will see the use of chemical weapons as we did in Syria. We might even see the horrible hypothetical that you just laid out. But only by being clear-eyed about the risks that are posed here to the security and stability of the West will we have the unity to be able to deter Putin from doing even more outrageous things.
If Vladimir Putin cuts the gas to Europe, what will the United States do in that regard? Because the talk of making the switch from your gas that you get through a pipeline to that you get on a tanker through liquefied natural gas, there are many countries in Europe, and you said you're going to Italy next, where that in the short term, that's just not going to happen.
Our administration, excuse me, the Biden administration is already working hard to secure additional gas supplies. They've made some significant recent policy changes to encourage the expansion of production of oil and gas in the United States and are coordinating with our European allies. Look, I was last here in Paris for the Paris Climate Agreement for COP21 for a moment of world leadership around climate ambition. I believe we have to be more determined, more ambitious in confronting climate change. But in the next year or two or three, we also need to come to Europe's aid in order to prevent the possibility that a critical reliance on Russian natural gas and oil will lead to a collapse of either the political will to sustain this fight against Russia and Ukraine or significant harm to the economies of countries like Italy and Germany. So I think if we pull together, we can find our way through this and we can provide the energy supplies that will be needed.
I was going to say, can the United States pick up the slack?
I believe that as one of the world's biggest producers of oil and gas, we may well be able to provide that, also in consultation with other countries that we're quite close to. Canada, Mexico are both major producers of oil and gas, and there's others throughout this region. So I think a coordinated effort to make sure that we are providing an alternative to Russian oil and gas is critical. Putin has long used energy as a weapon, and over-reliance on Putin's energy going forward would be a tragic mistake. So I think the United States needs to pull together with our critical allies and provide the short-term energy bridge we need, while also planning for the transition to a cleaner energy future, which can't come soon enough.
You may have noticed upon arriving here in the French capital, there's a campaign going on. We have the second round of a presidential election on Sunday. One of the two candidates, the far right's Marine Le Pen, has pledged that France would quit the integrated command of NATO if she was elected. What consequences would that have?
Well, this close to a presidential election, I think I will only say that I'm confident that the centuries-old and enduring partnership, the close alliance between the United States and France will continue, regardless of changes in our elections. We are democracies together, and that means we will continue our partnership together, regardless of the outcome of any election in the United States or in France.
But does it make a difference whether or not France is in that integrated command of NATO?
I think French participation in NATO is central to its future and its mission, but I don't think I should be commenting on the upcoming election. Just expressing my deep appreciation for the many contributions that France has made to the collective security of Europe and to the United States.
One final question for you. How did we get to this point where one country invades a sovereign nation in Europe in 2022?
I think many of us misjudged whether or not Putin was someone who would gradually become someone you could do business with, become someone who became more pro-Western. And I think the Biden administration has done a strong job of presenting intelligence in advance of Putin's aggression to help persuade the world to be clear-eyed about what a threat he is to peace and stability. I'm encouraged at how swift and united the response has been. But frankly, this is a turning point in modern European history. And we need to pull together. We need to have a sustained effort. And we need to ensure that Ukraine is able to win this conflict.
U.S. Senator Chris Coons, many thanks for speaking with us here on France 24.
Thank you.
And the war in Ukraine is weighing not just on the West, but on the entire planet. It is time for business. We say hello to Kate Moody.
Hi, Francois.
And the International Monetary Fund squarely pointing at Russia's invasion as it downgrades its forecast for world growth.
Yeah, just 3 months ago, the IMF slightly pared back its forecast for 2022 because of that resurgence of the Omicron variant of COVID-19. Now, just 3 months on, that outlook has been hit by this massive geopolitical disruption. The IMF projects the global economy will expand 3.6% this year and next. That's 0.8% lower than its January outlook, 1.3 percentage points lower than its projections 6 months ago. The IMF is predicting basically the collapse of Ukraine's economy, 35% contraction this year, and an 8.5% drop in Russian GDP. Economies that are closer to the conflict are going to be suffering more. So while the U.S. forecast, for example, has been scaled back just from 4 to 3.7%, the Eurozone, we know, is now expected to expand just 2.8% this year. That's down from 3.9% that was projected back in January. The forecast for Germany and France has been slashed from 3.8% and 3.5% respectively. Germany facing a bigger downgrade because of its closer financial and economic ties to Russia. UK GDP forecast to expand now 3.7%. All of this really the blame for this being put squarely on Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the supply chain disruptions and energy crunch that it has caused. Take a listen to the chief economist.
Beyond its immediate and tragic humanitarian impact, the war will slow economic growth and increase inflation. Overall economic risks have risen sharply, and policy trade-offs have become even more challenging. Like seismic waves, its effect will propagate far and wide.
Before the invasion of Ukraine, there were those saying that the rise in inflation was a blip because the world economy was restarting. Listening to that, it doesn't sound like that anymore. This isn't just a blip. It's here for a while.
Absolutely, for a suspended period of time. And actually, the IMF was even alluding to that back in January before the invasion. We knew that inflation was going to remain elevated for longer than had been expected because of the disruption caused by the pandemic. It is one of the major challenges that governments around the world are facing. The IMF now saying prices rising at an average of 5.7% in advanced economies this year. That's 1.8 percentage points higher than the January outlook. Emerging market and developing economies are even more exposed to disruptions and to higher prices in commodities in particular. And so the forecast for nearly 9% inflation is significantly higher than the last forecast as well. The IMF has really underscored here the pressure that's facing the most vulnerable populations in those poorer countries because they're being hit even harder by those rising food and energy prices. It said that central banks around the world have to walk a very careful line here as they start tightening their monetary policy. One other thing that they alluded to, if the EU were to hit Russia's energy sector with future sanctions, an embargo possibly on Russian oil or gas, the IMF said that relatively little could be done to mitigate the immediate effects of that, at least in the short term within Europe. The chief economist saying there would have to be some adjustment to energy consumption and dependence, especially within the European Union.
Yeah, you mentioned those sanctions. We heard the senator there, Chris Coons, in Paris to press for tighter sanctions coming up. And I guess you have corporations that are continuing to smell the coffee, as it were?
Yeah, the private sector has really turned its back in some ways on Russia. Another major Western brand has today further severed its ties. Stellantis officially suspending the remaining production of trucks and cars in Russia. The group, of course, merged Peugeot owner PSA and Fiat Chrysler. It had already put the brake on imports and exports in and out of Russia in the aftermath of that invasion. Now it says that it's having trouble getting enough parts to keep operating that remaining factory, which is just to the west of Moscow. It produced about 11 million vans there last year. It's a relatively small chunk of its overall business. But it is a reminder that Western firms that do maybe want to try to keep a presence in Russia will be facing real logistical challenges in addition to the possible damage to their brand and reputation.
All right, many thanks for that, Kate Moody, and we'll be back later with more business news, including the closing word on the markets. When you go to an art exhibit, you want to get a feel for what you're seeing. Well, a museum in Rouen in Normandy, France, has gone one step further on that score. Claire Rush has the story.
Using touch to view things differently. Curious visitors tried to determine the material of different works at this free exhibition in Rouen. Being able to freely handle the artwork provides a new kind of museum experience.
Touching things is a longer-lasting experience, but it activates senses that we normally never use at museums. It also encourages us to use our imagination, which we use less of as we get older.
Can you tell what the expression is?
They're smiling with their teeth and their mouth is open.
Visitors are surprised to see what the works really look like.
I needed a little more time in order to visualize and imagine it.
The traveling exhibition was first conceived by the Favre Museum in Montpellier with the Louvre. It was created with input from blind people so as to better understand their experience. The pieces are duplicates. People are encouraged to explore the art in their own way.
Some people don't react openly at first, but then they start expressing themselves, which is fun to see. There are textures that feel strange, others that feel nice. You can also feel scared by not being able to see it.
You can interpret them the way your mind wants to see it. But once you see the reality, you might be disappointed.
For those who want to see more, the original works are on display in 5 different partner museums.
More news coming up, and then it's the France 24 debate. The Battle of Donbass has begun, say the Ukrainians. What if Russia doesn't get a quick win to show for it? What happens then? Just one of the questions we'll be putting to our panel in the France 24 debate. Your reactions on the hashtag F24debate.
For this week's France in Focus, we've flown to a Mediterranean outcrop that many refer to as the Island of Beauty. But Corsica is also an island of tensions, with a proud nationalist movement gaining ground once again following the death of the jailed assassin Yvon Colonna. Join us as we head from the seafront in the capital to the university town of Corte to unpick the recent crisis and the calls for change. France in Focus on France 24 and France24.com. Liberté, égalité, actualité.